All right, let's dive into this attention crisis thing everyone keeps talking about. We're using Johann Hari's book, Stolen Focus, as our guide today. And, well, let me tell you, it's pretty eye-opening. So we are going to uncover like all the systemic reasons why we can't seem to focus, and more importantly, why that even matters, and then what we can actually do about it. Right?
Yeah, and you know what's really fascinating is that on the surface, it feels like, oh, I just can't focus, it's me. But Hari's investigation really reveals that. It's so much bigger than just like our individual struggles.
It's so true. And like his own journey starts with him just not being able to focus. He's like, I can't even finish reading a book.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to go to Graceland with my partner. But even there, in the jungle room, he finds this couple who are just totally glued to their phones, like completely oblivious to the actual experience of being in Graceland.
Yeah. You know, that anecdote is so powerful. It really highlights how pervasive this issue is. Because it's not just like, oh, I need more willpower. Like, there are these forces at play that are pulling us away from the present moment.
Oh, totally. And when he tried to do like a digital detox in Provincetown, it was really interesting. He did find like, okay, I'm sleeping better, I'm more creative. But he kind of came to this realization that, look, individual action is only going to take us so far. This is bigger than just like, oh, I'm going to delete a couple of apps. It's a much deeper problem.
It really is. It's like a systemic problem. And Hurry identifies like these 6 interconnected factors that are kind of stealing our focus. So there's this technology overload, lack of sleep, rising stress, an increase in ADHD diagnoses. Then there's this decline of free play in childhood. And then the way technology is designed to like manipulate our attention. It's like this perfect storm coming at us from all sides.
And out of all those 6, I think the one that's like the most unsettling is this idea that technology companies are deliberately manipulating us. Like he talked to all these former tech insiders like Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin, and they're basically like whistleblowers.
Yeah.
You know, talking about how these companies are using psychology against us.
It's true. It's like, it's not by accident that we're like glued to our screens. These platforms are designed to exploit our vulnerabilities. So take negativity bias, for example. Our brains are just naturally wired to pay more attention to negative information. And social media algorithms, well, they pick up on this, right? They prioritize content that triggers those negative emotions. And it just keeps us engaged in this cycle of like outrage and anxiety.
It makes you wonder if we even have control over our attention anymore. Like here he even has these quotes from people like Sean Parker. He was an early investor in Facebook. And he like openly admitted that. They designed the platform to be as addictive as possible. Like they were exploiting human psychology to make money.
Yeah, and that brings up a really crucial point. You can't just tell people to try harder or unplug. This is an environmental problem, you know. We're swimming in a sea of distractions. James Williams, a former Google strategist, he argues that, look, individual efforts to manage our attention are like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. We need to address the current itself, like these underlying structures that are shaping our attention.
So if this is like a systemic problem, where do we even begin to like tackle it?
Well, Harry looks into several other factors that contribute to like, oh, our collective attention deficit.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how interconnected they are. One area he explores is this impact of chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and financial insecurity.
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty common experiences these days. But how does that relate to like our ability to focus?
Well, Hori highlights this work of Nadine Burke-Harris. She's the Surgeon General of California. And she's done this really groundbreaking research on the impact of childhood trauma on brain development. And what she found is that children who experience high levels of stress, especially in like early childhood, they often struggle to focus and learn.
I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If your brain is constantly on high alert, worried about basic survival, it's hard to like settle down and concentrate on anything else.
Exactly. And this also connects to research on sleep deprivation. So Charles Czeisler, he's a leading sleep scientist, and he's shown that when we don't get enough sleep, our prefrontal cortex, which is that part of our brain that's responsible for decision-making and focus, it basically goes offline.
Like we're running on fumes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you add financial stress to the mix. And Senhil Mullainathan, a behavioral economist, he found that like financial worries can actually reduce a person's cognitive function. So it makes it even harder to focus and make good decisions. It's like your brain is running on a low battery. You just don't have the same mental energy or capacity.
So we're not just talking about distractions here. It's like this whole ecosystem of factors that are working against our ability to focus. It's kind of overwhelming. But Hari doesn't just leave us hanging there, does he? He explores some potential solutions too, right?
He does. He looks at it from like both an individual and a societal perspective. So on an individual level, He emphasizes the importance of like really simple things like getting enough sleep, managing stress, through things like mindfulness techniques, and just being more intentional about our technology use.
Okay, that sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about the systemic changes he suggests. Like, we need to shift the whole tide, right? Not just try to stay afloat individually.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about all this stuff with technology and stress, sleep deprivation and financial insecurity. But then Hari dives into something I hadn't even, thought about, which is this whole decline of free play in childhood.
Yeah.
So, what's the connection there?
It's really fascinating. Hari argues that unstructured play is essential for developing attention and focus. So when kids are allowed to roam free, explore, create their own games, they're engaging in a mental workout that strengthens those attention muscles.
Makes sense. It's like they're building their own mental obstacle course, learning how to, navigate challenges and stay engaged.
Exactly. But in today's world, kids' lives are so structured and supervised, there's just less time for that free, imaginative play. And Hari believes that has real consequences.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about limiting screen time. It's about making sure that kids actually have time to engage in activities that naturally cultivate focus.
Yeah, he talks about this work of Lenore Skenazy. She advocates for giving kids more independence. It's called the Let Grow movement. And it encourages parents to give their kids the freedom to explore and play unsupervised. And she's found that they actually thrive. They become more resilient, more resourceful, and yes, more focused.
That's really interesting. It really challenges how we think about childhood today.
It does. And this also connects to Hari's discussion about the rise in ADHD diagnoses. So while he acknowledges that ADHD is a real condition, he raises some questions about whether we're over-diagnosing it and whether we're too quick to medicate children who might benefit from other types of interventions.
Yeah, I see what he's getting at. If we're not giving kids the chance to develop their attention skills naturally, are we jumping to conclusions about their behavior?
Exactly. He suggests that some kids who are diagnosed with ADHD might actually be struggling with stress or lack of sleep or lack of opportunity for free play, all these factors that can look like ADHD symptoms.
So instead of just labeling and medicating, maybe we need to step back and create environments that actually support children's natural development.
That's a key takeaway. He's not saying medication is never appropriate, but he is advocating for a more holistic approach that considers all these factors.
Okay, so we've covered technology, stress, play, and ADHD. Are there any other systemic issues that contribute to this whole attention crisis?
Well, Hari also digs into the impact of our modern diet and environment on our brains. So he explores how processed foods, sugar, and unhealthy fats can actually negatively affect brain function and make it harder to focus.
So it's not just about what we're doing, it's also about what we're consuming.
Exactly. He interviews all these nutrition experts who emphasize the importance of whole foods, healthy fats, and a balanced diet for optimal brain function. They compare it to fueling a car, You can't expect high performance if you're using low-grade fuel.
It's a good analogy. So what about the environment? How does that play into all of this?
Hari talks about this work of Barbara Demonix. She's a scientist who studies the effects of endocrine-disrupting chemicals on brain health. And these chemicals are found in everyday products. And they can interfere with brain development and potentially impact attention.
So it's like a double whammy. What we put in our bodies and what we're exposed to in our surroundings can both sabotage our focus.
That's right. And this leads to what Hari sees as the most important point, the need for collective action. He argues that addressing this attention crisis requires a movement, akin to the fight for climate action. We need to push for systemic changes that support a more attention-rich world.
Okay, so what would that actually look like? What kind of sight battle can we engage in?
That's the question Hari leaves us with. And it's a powerful one. He draws inspiration from Ben Stewart, who was really instrumental in that successful climate change movement in Britain. And Stewart argues that movements gain momentum by focusing on a concrete, winnable sight battle. That represents that larger issue.
So what would that be for the attention crisis?
Well, there are several possibilities. We could push for regulations that limit the manipulative tactics of tech companies. We can advocate for policies that promote free play. Or we can work to create healthier food environments. Hari believes that while individual changes are important, ultimately we need to address the root causes by changing the systems that are shaping our attention.
So it's about creating a world where focus isn't a luxury. It's a right, where our attention is valued and protected, not exploited.
Exactly. And that requires recognizing that our attention is interconnected. Like when one person's attention is fragmented, it affects us all. It diminishes our collective capacity for critical thinking, empathy, problem solving.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. So where do we go from here? What are some practical steps listeners can take to reclaim their focus and contribute to this movement for attention?
That's a great question. And I think Hori offers some really helpful insights. But before we dive into those, let's take a quick pause. We'll be back in a moment to explore some actionable strategies and leave you with a final thought to chew on.
All right, we're back. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to actually do something about all of this.
I know, right? It's kind of empowering to realize that we're not just stuck. So let's talk about what we can actually do, starting with those personal strategies we talked about.
Yeah, give me the actionable stuff. What can I do right now to get my focus back?
Okay, well, first, Hari really emphasizes prioritizing sleep. I know it sounds so basic, but so many of us are just not sleeping enough. And as we talked about earlier, when you're sleep deprived, it directly impacts that prefrontal cortex, your brain's control center for focus and decision making.
Okay, so no more sacrificing sleep for Netflix. Got it. What else?
All right, next up, managing stress. Hari suggests things like mindfulness techniques, like meditation, or even just spending time in nature. Even a few minutes a day can really make a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I'm stressed, my mind is just going a mile a minute.
Yeah.
It's like trying to read a book in a windstorm.
Yeah.
You just can't absorb anything.
Exactly. That chronic stress is putting your brain in a constant state of fight or flight, which makes it impossible to focus. And then, of course, there's technology. And we've talked about how it's designed to be addictive. But there are things we can do to regain control. Turning off notifications, setting screen time limits, just being more intentional about how and when we use our devices.
Be the master of your tech, not the other way around.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of creating those tech-free zones or times in your day, like no phones at the dinner table, or designate a few hours each week as completely unplugged.
Those are great tips. But I keep coming back to this idea of collective action. It feels like we need a bigger societal shift to really tackle this. So what can we do on a larger scale?
Well, like Harry suggests, we can look at successful movements like the fight for climate action. We need to identify those site battles, those specific areas we can focus on to make a real difference.
Okay, so what would a site battle look like in the fight for attention?
Well, one area could be advocating for stricter regulations on tech companies. We can demand more transparency about how their algorithms work, push for limits on those manipulative design tactics that exploit our psychology. We can also support organizations like Let Grow that are promoting free play and challenging that overscheduling of child.
Yeah, it's about taking back control, right? Shaping a world that values focus and attention, not distraction and manipulation.
Exactly. And we can also focus on creating healthier food environments. This could mean supporting policies that limit the marketing of unhealthy foods to kids, or advocating for better access to fresh, whole foods in underserved communities.
Making those healthier choices, the easier choices.
Right. And remember, this all starts with awareness. Talk to your friends and family about this. Share what you learned from this deep dive. The more people who understand these forces at play, the more momentum we can build for change.
So it's not just about fixing ourselves, it's about fixing the system.
Exactly. It's about creating a world where focus isn't a luxury, but a right. A world where our attention is valued and protected, not exploited. And as Hari says, history shows us that even seemingly impossible changes can happen when people come together and demand better.
It's a message of hope.
Yeah.
We all need to hear that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into stolen focus, I'm left with a sense of urgency, but also possibility. This isn't a problem we can ignore, but it's also not a problem we have to just accept.
I agree. We have the power to reclaim our focus, both individually and collectively. And in doing so, we can create a world that values deep thinking, meaningful connection, and the ability to actually engage with the present moment.
That's what it's all about. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep. Because remember, the future of our attention is the future of our humanity. Thanks for joining us.